Welcome to the North American Railcar Corporation's instructional video on the N-scale high-performance Magnalock brake lines. So let's go over some tools and supplies you'll need to install these on railcars and locomotives. You'll need one ruler where the increments go right to the edge like this one here, and preferably in metric. Gel super glue, paint and paintbrush, a pin vise and some drill bits, black sharpie, pair of tweezers, fine sandpaper or emery cloth, toothpicks, pair of needle nose pliers, pair of side cutters or rail nippers, an assortment of jeweler's screwdrivers depending on the car you're going to be working on, a sharp razor knife, a pair of scissors, scrapped cardboard from a cereal box, pretty much any type of masking tape, and a package of our high-performance Magnalock brake lines in N-scale. The package that contains your high-performance Magnalock brake lines, you're going to receive your brake lines themselves, another package of some steel wire with some extra little square pieces of plastic just in case they fall off your air hoses here. Also, you'll have some steel wire that's going to form your brake lines leading to your air hoses, and some cardboard here. There are two different types of cars I'm going to show you how to install the air hoses on today. First is a body mounted coupler style like this one here. The other one is a truck mounted coupler like this. And I'll show you how to install on a locomotive as well. I'm going to start off with the car that has a body mounted coupler. First we'll have to take off the trucks and take off the coupler. Here we got the coupler off the car. Now we have to cut the trip pin off flush with the bottom of the knuckle of the coupler, or just a hair above it. I have trimmed the trip pin off the coupler now. As you can see, it is flush with the bottom of the coupler, or slightly above. It's much better to do it off the car rather than leaving it on the car and trimming it off. It just gives a better appearance to the coupler and has potential better operations for your air hoses themselves. If the car is upside down and facing you, we're going to run the airline along the left-hand side of the coupler box. Starting at the bolster, running along the corner of the body and the coupler box to the end of the box, and down flush with the bottom of the coupler shank right here. For all standard couplers like this, that's where we want to end our airline, flush with the bottom of the coupler shank. If you have offset coupler heads, you may need to do some adjusting in the measurements to make the air hoses function properly. Grab the wire that you got in the kit now, and I'm just going to give it a nice 90-degree cut at the end here. Okay, now we've done that. Now what we want to do is we want to give it a 90-degree bend. And in this particular instance, I know the pliers here at the end is the right distance that we need from the bottom of the coupler shank to the top of the coupler box. So I'm going to go ahead and bend it. And there you go. Grab the wire you just bent, and now we need to mark the length of it. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but closer the better. Now you want the end of the piece of wire here flush with the coupler box, not to stick past it or be too short. It wants to be perfectly flush with the coupler box. So while using a toothpick, it's a little bit of glue along the bottom edge, like so. And grab your airline that you had just cut. And there you go. We're going to make a couple jigs now. First we're going to make one out of the cardboard from your cereal box. Go ahead and cut a piece about 1.25 inches by 1.5 inches, and another piece 1.25 inches by 1/4 inch. And what we're going to do is we're just going to add just a couple drops of CA glue to the back, and we're going to glue it to the bigger piece like so. And that's just going to act as a stop when we cut our air hoses to the right length. Now we're going to assemble our second jig from the parts that came with our package of brake lines. We're going to glue these 3 pieces together like a pancake, and then we're going to glue this piece of steel wire along one edge about 3/16 of an inch away. This jig is going to be used to help hold, align and space the air hose properly while we glue it to the rail car. So let's go ahead and do that. You just need a couple small dabs of glue. Doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. And now what we're going to do is find the neatest side, which is this one here. And if you're having this side here facing you, we're going to glue our piece of steel wire along this way. Keep in mind later on we're going to be using the right hand side of the jig for holding the magnet. So keep your glue on the left hand side of the wire while you're gluing it to the cardboard. Leave the right hand side free of glue. And there it is. The glue's set up enough on our airline here. We can go ahead and put the chucks back on the car. Now we're going to go ahead and cut the air hose to the proper length. Here's the first jig we just made. We're going to use this to help us cut the air hose to the correct length. For 99% of the cars, 7 millimeters of the total length of the air hose is going to be perfect. If you have modified your car from truck mounted to body mounted couplers, these measurements may be off, but this is a good starting point by trying the 7 millimeters first. And if you need to make it longer or shorter, it's a good idea only doing 1/4 or 1/2 millimeter increments, smaller or longer, as those small increments is a big deal in end scale. So we're going to go ahead and mark this template at 7 millimeters precisely, and we're going to go ahead and cut our air hose. And what we're going to do is take our ruler again, and that's why it's critical to have a ruler where the increments come right to the edge of the ruler, because it makes it a lot easier. So what we're going to do is we're going to put it up against the stop that we made, grab a razor knife, and we're going to mark it with a little mark at 7 millimeters. And again, it is very important that we have precise measurements here, because if we don't, the air hoses may not function properly. So it might be hard to see in the camera, but I made a mark here, like right there at 7 millimeters. Now grab one of the air hoses that came with the package, and we're just going to place it up against the stop like so, and we're just going to hold it there with our fingers, making sure it's tightly against the stop. Then we're going to grab our sharp razor knife and we're going to cut it at exactly 7 millimeters where we marked it on the piece of cardboard, like that. It's time to use the piece of track that I mentioned earlier. Go ahead and place your rail car on the tracks. Also 2 pieces of cardboard like so, glued together, and a piece of masking tape, and we'll just put that over one end of the track. All that is going to be for is a stop to stop the rail car from moving around while we go ahead and glue the air hose to the car. It's time to use our second jig we made earlier on in the video. Also grab our air hose that we have just cut to our 7 millimeter length that we need for a particular car that we're working on. As you can see, there's a red dot on one side of the magnet. Now, it could be any color, red, green, purple, pink. It doesn't make a difference. All that does is indicate this particular side of the magnet has to be facing up when you put it onto the rail car. If you don't have this facing up, what might happen is that the other cars may not couple properly together with each other. Or if you take it to someone else's layout, the air hoses may not work properly with theirs. So it's important that we always keep the color dot facing up or towards you, depending how you look at it when you install it onto the car. So let's place it onto the steel wire on the jig and continue on with the installation. We're going to place the air hose onto our metal wire of our jig now, with the jig orientated so that the metal wire side is facing you. We're going to place the air hose about 1/4 of an inch away from the right hand side of the jig. And when we place it onto the jig, we want to make sure it is flat as possible, like so. With the car on the track that we previously taped the stop to at the far end, this end we have added a few pieces of cardboard to the bottom of it so the car will not roll forward on us while we align and glue the air hose to the car. I'll show you exactly where we need to align the air hose to the air line on the car. If you take the coupler here as a reference, the coupler shank is divided into 2 halves, the top half and the bottom half. We want to try to keep the air hose in line with the bottom half of the coupler shank as much as possible while we glue it to the air line. Even though this air line is a little bit longer, we still need to keep the air hose parallel with the bottom half of the coupler shank when we glue it to the air line itself. If the air line goes a little bit below it, you could always add a little bit more glue, disguise it, and you'll never see it once we've finished gluing the air hose to the air line here. Another note, if your coupler is an offset head up or down, you'll have to adjust the length of the air line so that when you line up the air hose to the air line, it would be in theoretically the same position if the coupler was a normal head coupler. So if the coupler is an offset head going up, you'll have to have the air hose a little bit higher, obviously, than the bottom of the coupler shank. So you'll have to do some measurements there to figure it out. And it's very important that we keep the air hoses the same height on all the cars so they look right and function correctly. We're going to take our jig now and slide it over to the end of the car, and now we're going to line the end of the hose up with the proper position parallel with the bottom half of the coupler on the air line. So what we're going to do is slide it over with a non-magnetic pointing device. We're going to slowly move the air hose up and down until we can get as close as possible to the bottom half of the coupler shank. And that looks to be pretty good right there. So we're going to gently slide it back so we don't move the air hose that's on the jig. And we're going to place a bit of glue on the air line here. I suggest doing it on the airline rather than on the air hose, because you don't want to move the air hose once you have lined it up. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to show you the other angle we're going to set the air hose to while we're gluing it to the car. Of course, the cut end is going to be glued to the airline here, and the magnet end should fall in line with the center of the car. So it should end up right here. You don't want the magnet too far this way or too far that way. For the best operations, again, you want to keep it in line with the center of the car, right about here. Now I'm going to go ahead and add a bit of glue to the airline itself. You don't need a lot, you just need enough for the air hose to stick to. And you could go back later and add some more if need be. That seems to be about the center of the car. We're going to let it set for a few minutes, and then we could come back with a toothpick, add a little bit more glue to the glue joint to make it a little bit stronger and neater. Then we're going to let that set up for a while, and then once that is finished setting, we will paint the airline and color the magnet black with a Sharpie. While the glue is setting on our last car, we're going to move on to our next car here, a car that has truck mounted couplers. Now the procedure is pretty much exactly the same as the other one. So let's start off by first removing the truck itself. We'll have to remove the wheels off the truck, and we're going to remove the coupler from the truck too. Alright, let's get started. As you can see here, I've taken the coupler off the truck, and just like I did before, I trimmed the trip pin off flush with the bottom of the coupler knuckle here. I'm going to set this aside and we'll continue on. Now you can take the coupler box cover, and before we put the coupler back together again on the truck, you want to take the emery cloth or fine sandpaper and roughen up the side of the coupler box cover. You'll want to glue your airline too. I'm going to use super glue again, but I heard that Gorilla epoxy glue works better on this type of plastic. You may want to try that. I don't have any of that right now, so I'm just going to use my gel super glue. As you can see, I've reassembled the truck. I put the coupler back on. I have cut and bent the airline leading to the air hose. Keeping the airline end at the same height as the bottom of the coupler shank. Also, as you notice, I have not extended it too far back because it may interfere with the turning radius of your car. Here is the jig we used last time to cut an air hose at exactly 7 millimeters long. We're going to use it again to cut another air hose at exactly 7 millimeters long. Very rarely you'll ever need an air hose shorter or longer than 7 millimeters. Always try the 7 millimeter air hose first. But if for some reason it is not looking right or functioning right, only adjust the length of the air hose 1/4 millimeter in either direction until you find the right length. Those small measurements do add up big time in end scale. So let's go ahead and cut our air hose to 7 millimeters long. There it is. So go ahead and grab our second jig here that we used to help hold and align the air hose to our car. Also grab the air hose we just cut to exactly 7 millimeters in length. And again, notice that the color dot is facing up. Again, that's very important for all air hoses to function properly, that the color dots are facing up or towards you, depending how you look at it. Again, the color could be any color, pink, purple, or blue. All that means is that that particular face of the magnet has to be facing up or towards you, depending on how you look at it. So let's go ahead and place the magnet on the bottom right hand corner of this jig, just like last time, about 1/4 of an inch away from the end, like that, and keep it as flat as we can to the jig. So let's go and put our car back on the track and line up the air hose to the car. Here's our jig again with the air hose attached to the metal wire. We're gonna do an alignment of the air hose to the air line. And again, keep in mind, we have to keep the air hose in line or parallel with the bottom half of the coupler shank. So let's go ahead and do that. Now sometimes it's easier to push it by the magnet rather than the hose itself. And there you go. So that's close enough. I'm going to carefully back it away, add a bit of glue to the airline, and we'll go from there. You don't need much glue again, just a tiny little drop. You could go back over and add more later. Okay, there you go. It seems to be lined up properly with the center of the car now. Now we're going to go ahead again, just like last one, let it sit for a while, come back, add a little bit more glue to the glue joint to make it stronger and more pretty. Then we're going to let it sit again for a nice long while so it sets up real nicely, and we'll go ahead and paint the airline and color the magnet black with a Sharpie. We're going to install these on a locomotive now. There isn't very many differences compared to a rail car, just a few, but we'll go over them with you right now. Now we're going to start the installation on this locomotive. So first we're going to take off the coupler and trim off the trip pin just like we did on the rail cars. Alright, we have taken the coupler off the locomotive, trimmed the trip pin off, reassembled the coupler, and now we'll just set that aside for now. We're going to get the locomotive ready for the airline we're going to bend in a minute. But first, make sure the locomotive is right side up, facing yourself. In the top right hand corner of the coupler box area in the pilot, where it is right around where my pointer is, we're going to drill a small hole, a number 73 drill bit size. That should match the wire that comes with your kit. But please do a test hole in a scrap piece of plastic first to make sure the wire fits nicely. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, I've installed the coupler. I've drilled the hole here on the right top corner for the airline to come out of. And now I'll just simply bend a piece of wire to replicate the airline coming out of the locomotive leading to the air hose. I'll do that now. I have installed the airline on the locomotive, as you can see. Now, there wasn't very much difference between the locomotive and a rail car so far, other than having to drill a hole to hold the airline in place. You may or may not have to do this on all locomotives, but this particular case I had to do so. Now, there are a few options we could do with the airline, and let's go over them now. The couple options that you may want to try on your locomotive or maybe some longer freight cars, instead of running the airline vertical like this, you may want to angle it a bit towards the coupler like so. On freight cars you may have to bend it differently to accomplish the same thing. But anyhow, this gives you the advantage of having the same length of air hose without having to make a longer air hose, and it will go around sharper corners without uncoupling. Now on my test track, I have roughly a 12-inch radius, give or take a quarter of an inch. This SD40-2 has no problems going around that radius with the airline vertical like this. So only try the angle approach if everything else fails. So that's just a little hint that will hopefully help you guys out if you're having difficulty making the air hoses work on longer locomotives or freight cars going around very tight curves. But most likely you will not have to do that. So let's go ahead and we're going to install the airline vertically like this, and now we're going to line up the air hose like we did before to the airline. Just like the other two cars we just done, we're going to cut an air hose at 7 millimeters long. We're going to place the air hose on this metal wire here, just like we did before, remembering that the red dot or colored dot will be facing up or towards you at all times. That's very important to make sure that the air hoses work properly. So go ahead and place their air hose on the steel wire about a quarter of an inch away from the edge, like this on the right hand side. With the locomotive on the track, we're going to do the alignment of the air hose to the air line now. And that looks about right. Just like before, we're going to run the air hose from the airline, and it's going to come across and going to end up in the center alignment of the locomotive right around here. There you go, that looks about right. Just like the other two rail cars, you're going to go in and add a little bit more glue after this sets up first. Then you could paint the airline and then color the magnet black with a Sharpie. The glue is thoroughly set on our car now, so we could go ahead and paint the airline leading to the air hose. I suggest using acrylic paint so it doesn't affect the rubber in the air hose. When you're painting it, just beware just to paint just around the junction here, not to get too much on the air hose itself. We want to keep it nice and limber. Alright, now when it comes to the magnet, you could use paint on it, but it's going to take a very long time to dry. I'll let it sit at least overnight before you attempt to couple it to another car or locomotive, or it may stick together permanently. But I would suggest using a black Sharpie to color it, and then you could pretty much use it within 5 or 10 minutes. So there you go. Here are the two cars we finished coupled together. Thank you for watching this N-scale instructional video. Thank you very much and have a good day.